Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 591 to interrupt his yellow plan. Here, of course, the antecedent of the pronoun his is the sun. Now, we're back to another comparison poem here between the sun and, as Emily calls it, ourselves. In other words, humans versus the world of nature. We've seen this a number of times. Our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as our preceding 590 poems. We just finished with 590, Did You Ever Stand in a Cavern's Mouth? Now, some have going to argue, and maybe this will be you, that this is really a poem about the inevitability of fate. But I want to argue that this is Emily as naturalist. Maybe we'll think about Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage. Or maybe even Emily as romantic, and we'll think about Lord Byron and his apostrophe to the ocean. Let's enjoy the text. To interrupt his yellow plan, the sun does not allow caprices of the atmosphere. And even when the snow heaves balls of specks like vicious boy directly in his eye, does not so much as turn his head, busy with majesty. 'Tis his to stimulate the earth and magnetize the sea and bind astronomy in place. Yet any passing by would deem ourselves the busier, as the minutest bee that rides emits a thunder, a bomb, to justify. Now, it is an interesting, and typical of Emily, right? She'll move from the whimsical to end the poem with a very interesting question. From the outside looking in, let's just call it a Martian or a visitor from elsewhere. If they looked and they saw, they might argue that in fact we and the bees are way, way busier than something like the sun and its majesty. And yet, not so much. The sun continues to do its job regardless of what is happening. Notice, to interrupt his yellow plan. It's a beautiful way to say it. In other words, you and I don't have the power to stop the sun from shining. And in that regards, there's a certain aspect of humility, again, romanticism here, that one should probably accept. Notice, to interrupt his yellow, notice capitalized yellow plan. The sun does not allow caprices of the atmosphere. And in other words, the sun doesn't care about what's going on elsewhere. The sun will continue to do its sun shining thing, right? Now, obviously, you can think about the sun literally or obviously symbolically here. Again, some have called the sun symbolic of fate. In other words, stuff is going to happen the way it's going to happen. In our study of Lao Tzu, you'll recall, and the Tao Te Ching, we said in that famous story about the horseman and his son and the wild horses, who knows what is good and what is bad, right? And even to just double down, when the snow, I love the tone here, the whimsical tone, the ironic tone. When the snow heaves balls of specks, pay attention to the verbs here from heaves to stimulate. When the snow heaves balls of specks, and then like vicious boy, you have to smile at that one, right? Directly in his eye, throwing snowballs, does not so much as turn his head, busy with majesty. And I think busy is the key word of this poem. I think this poem hangs on the word busy. In other words, the sun is too busy doing its sun things for its sun life to care very much about some silly boy trying to cause mischief. 'Tis the sun's, his, to what? Stimulate, the job of the sun. Stimulate the earth, magnetize the sea, bind astronomy in place. There's a side note, a possible that says that in place it was from blame. I can't help but think of astronomy and think about Whitman's When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. You'll recall that we gave full lectures on every poem of Whitman's deathbed edition, 1892 edition of Leaves of Grass. We call that series Talks with Walt here, Chats with Emily. But notice, the sun doesn't have time because it's too busy doing the things of what? Well, astronomy and the seas. And yet, now she'll finish with this typical Emily brilliant observation. Any passing by would deem ourselves, so what do you mean passing by? Well, passing by the sun. In other words, passing by our world. In other words, someone who can stand outside of the understanding of the world of nature would deem ourselves the busier. And then she'll go to the as simile. As the minutest bee that rides emits a thunder, a bomb, to justify. Now, I think of this word justify, and immediately I can't help but think of Plato's Republic, Book 10, 617, the responsibilities with the chooser. God is justified. You'll remember that we've given full lectures on all of that at learnstrong.net, as well as that great theodicy of Milton's Paradise Lost. And I think Emily's playing a similar game here. While it appears, and I think this is the 2A observation of message, while it appears that we are the ones that are so unbelievably busy, much like bees going around doing our bee thing, in the end, the true power is the power of the Son in the Son's majesty. At 2B, I love the whimsical, though, tone of this poem. At 3A, well, we mentioned Crane's Red Badge of Courage, and you'll recall that several passages in that study with given lectures at learnstrong.net play that game of nature just doesn't seem to get too emotionally involved in the sorrows and the pain and suffering, the busyness of us. Thoreau's Walden also comes to mind. And of course, Thoreau plays similar kinds of games, right? That is to say, the seasons go on and on. As that one famous song, "Seasons don't fear the reaper." In other words, there's a sense that this is the way life is. And then we mentioned, of course, Walt Whitman's learned astronomer, although, to be fair, Whitman plays very similar games as Emily in this poem. Finally, in 3B, it's a funny question to ask, and yet I suppose it's worth it. Do you think you're busier than the sun? And to what degree do you think the sun might be busier than you? Thank you.